So it's been about 2 weeks or so since I've made a video on this channel, and a few of you guys might have seen, but it's actually been because I've been on a trip. I actually got the chance to go to Europe for about 2 weeks, and I got a lot of awesome images from that. And so I'm editing them right now, and I'm looking forward to sharing them with you guys in the future as I kind of develop and make a few more films to go along with them. But when I was there, I took the 18-55, and so as I'm kind of getting back into the swing of things here, I wanted to kind of start off with an easier video, and that's to compare the XF 16-55 and the XF 18-55, two very similar but quite different zoom lenses in the Fujifilm lineup. I kind of want to give my thoughts on each lens and which one might be better for you, depending on what you might need it for, depending on what your intent and use would be. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'll start by talking about a brief overview of the similarities, because there actually tends to be a lot more differences between these two. And I think the differences will be more of a defining feature as to deciding which one you would actually want to use. So let's get started with the similarities. The main similarities between these two lenses are that they cover a very similar range of focal lengths. And these are a standard set of focal lengths. They're very versatile, meaning that you can use them for a lot of things, a lot of different types of photography, because you have your wide end on the 18 and the 16 end, and you can get a good amount of telephoto compression for portraits on the 55 end. So these two are very, very similar in those aspects. They're very versatile for both photo and video, especially for video, because zoom lenses, I think, are a bit more useful in those aspects. You can switch between focal lengths more seamlessly, and then you can get a lot of different types of perspectives to kind of make more of a story, you know what I mean? Similarly, both of these lenses feature linear motors, so they have very solid and very fast autofocus systems. So if autofocus is kind of a concern for you, you want something good and more accurate, well, you can't go wrong with either of these lenses. Those are the general kind of similarities between these two lenses. Now I want to get into kind of more of the differences, because I believe by learning the differences between these two lenses, you can kind of get a better grasp on which one is more fit for you. So the first thing I want to talk about is the aperture, because they feature a different set of aperture ranges. The 16-55 features a 2.8 aperture throughout the entire zoom range, while the 18-55 has a variable aperture 2.8 to f4. So this might be a distinction as to which one you would want to buy. I remember when I was buying the 16-55 way back in March or so, I really liked the idea of having a solid aperture throughout the entire range, not having a variable aperture which would switch up on me as I zoom through the different focal lengths. I thought that would be a bit more annoying, and I was kind of right about that, because the 18-55, although it is a very solid lens and it's much more faster than the other quote-unquote kit lenses you might be getting out with other systems, it's kind of more, I kind of ended up using it more of a f4 lens throughout the entire range or spectrum. I think I find that much more simpler, because when I'm switching between 18mm and 55mm or 35 or whatever it happens to be, I don't want to be changing my exposure settings every time, because the aperture is going to be switching up on me. So I've actually noticed that I've ended up using this lens more of a f4 lens throughout the entire way, especially for video. I think finding focus, because I generally use manual focus for video now, I think finding focus through an f4 aperture is much more easier than getting a nice super bokeh. I think I'll find a different prime if I want that kind of background separation in the future. So that's just something to be noted. If you like or want the f2.8 aperture of the 16-55 throughout, that would be the lens to get. I think f2.8 is actually pretty amazing, because it just looks really good throughout all ranges in all photos and videos. But if that doesn't bother you too much and you want to save a little bit more money, I think the 18-55 f4 is still pretty solid. I talked about this in my other review, but the telephoto compression of 35mm or 55mm isn't as bad as you think it will be. You can actually get a good amount of separation at f4 still. So those are just my thoughts on it. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about is autofocus, and this goes for photo and video, because both of these lenses are very good at autofocus. They're probably one of the better ones in Fujifilm's system, and that's because they feature a linear motor, which only the newer ones are starting to get. We have the new 23mm and the new 33mm. Those ones have linear focus as well. So we're just finally starting to see those come out in primes. But in terms of zoom lenses, these both have really good focusing systems. I think for photography, you're not going to have any problems with either of these lenses. They acquire focus quite quickly and quite accuracy. The difference comes a bit more in video. I think the 16-55 is a bit better at autofocus for video than the 18-55, and that might just be because of its like red badge lens or whatever it happens to be, but I noticed it is a bit more accurate and it holds focus a bit better. Now, something to be noted for video for these two lenses is that I actually use manual focus for both of these things, because I feel like with Fuji's focusing system, at least with the X-T4 and both of these linear motor lenses, is that they're really good at acquiring focus, but they're not so good at like holding focus. So it's really good for photography because what you want is to acquire focus, and then you just, for that split second, you take a picture and you're good. But when it comes to videography, you kind of want to hold that focus, especially if you have certain subjects that you're trying to record. So what I noticed that I do with both of these lenses is that I set it to manual focus. I will use the back button autofocus system. So I'm taking advantage of the autofocus system to acquire the focus, and then I just start my record button, and then I just roll, and then I keep it from there. If my subject moves, it has a natural kind of fallout because it's on manual focus, so there's not going to be any hunting or breathing or anything like that. And then I can always adjust the manual focus lever from there if I miss focus or something like that. So that is how I focus with the Fujifilm systems for video. I don't think they're quite on par with Sony yet, where they can acquire focus and hold it and just track subjects forever. That would be cool. But for now, I think manual focus has a really nice and natural feel to it, so I'm not bothered by it too much. So if autofocus is a concern for you, I would consider learning manual focus, or just figuring out how to deal with the kind of occasional hunt or change in focus that Fujifilm sometimes has. But if you guys have any autofocus tips, please leave them down below, because maybe I'm just doing this wrong. Anyways, moving on. Next thing I want to talk about is image quality, because these two lenses have really pretty amazing image quality. And I will admit though that the 16-55 is much sharper than the 18-55, just based on my general observations. This is not going to be kind of clinical tests, you can figure those out from other videos, but just in general, what I've noticed is that the 16-55 is much sharper than the 18-55, and that's kind of to be expected because you're paying more for this lens anyways. But I think the 18-55 is still quite sufficiently sharp. My general use case scenario for photos and videos is not to get the sharpest image, but to get the right, subject in focus, and that's how you end up with a good portrait rather than just having a super sharp lens. If sharpness is kind of importance to you and it really matters to you and you want the sharpest lens, then I would recommend the 16-55 because it is sharper than the 18-55. If you're not too bothered by that and the 18-55 seems more affordable and the size is much better, then I would recommend going for it. You're not going to have like a really weak lens. And to be honest, sharpness in general in lenses is quite overrated. You don't need the sharpest lens to have a good photo. You can get by with just even some of the older lenses and stuff like that. I've talked about the XF 18mm f2, where I could get much more pleasing results even though the lens isn't tack sharp, so something to be noted. But the image quality otherwise is really good. Either the X-T4 or the X Pro 1, those are my two kind of interchangeable lenses Fuji cameras right now that I have. I've used the 18-55 and the 16-55 on both. I wouldn't recommend the 16-55 on the X Pro 1 or any of the X Pro series just because it's so big, but in terms of image quality, I think they're both really good. Next up, I want to talk about something the 16-55 has that the 18-55 doesn't necessarily have, but might matter to you. And that feature is the red badge. The red badge is kind of an indication for Fujifilms, almost like Sony's G Master lenses. They're just a kind of notch above all the other standard lenses that they have in their system, meaning that they're higher build quality, higher optical quality, all that good stuff that you might find from Sony's G Master lenses. And so the 16-55 is a red badge lens, meaning that it's going to be better than the 18-55, at least as far as Fujifilm kind of perceives it to be. And this partially goes into build quality, so the 16-55 has weather sealing or weather resistance, while the 18-55 does not. And this could be of great importance to you. To be honest, I've used the 18-55 in rain before, at least light rain. I haven't had problems much so in it. But if you are concerned about weather resistance and weather sealing, I know it's important. I think having that little bit of extra comfort is pretty important, and I think goes a long way when you're using your camera out on the field. Then the 16-55 would probably be a better option for you. But both of these lenses have pretty good build quality. I think they're both made all out of metal. The 16-55, the zoom is much smoother, the manual focus is much better, the aperture is click, while the 18-55 is kind of different. The zoom is okay, it doesn't hold the best. I've noticed if I have too many filters on the front, it'll actually start to slip. The focus ring is kind of small, but it works. And the click aperture, well, it's not too bad. bad. So that's all I can say. The build quality of the 16-55 is just better, but the 18-55 isn't bad. Does that make sense? So the last thing I want to talk about, and this is probably more of the deciding factor, at least for me, as to why I choose one lens over the other, is actually the size, because this is probably one of the biggest hallmarks or differences between these two lenses, is that the 16-55 is a really, really big lens, while the 18-55 isn't that big. It's actually quite compact, small, portable, and good to carry around. So that's what I think separates and differentiates these two lenses. If you're looking for a more compact lens, then the 18-55 is your bet. If you don't mind the size and you're looking for the highest optical image quality or whatever, then the 16-55 is probably your bet. But that's generally what led me to buy the 18-55 in the first place. I had the 16-55 back in March, and I thought it would kind of carry me over and I'd be able to use it for everything because it was just an amazing lens. But I felt myself needing something smaller, more compact, and more portable, and that's what led me to the 18-55. So now I actually have both lenses, which I didn't think I would have or really even use two zoom lenses, but I'm actually finding a way to integrate both of them into my kit now, and I think that is really interesting and actually quite fun. So real quick, one thing I forgot to mention about the 18-55 is that it actually has optical image stabilization, and this was one of the pretty important things as to why I bought this lens. I can't believe I kind of forgot about it, but the reason why I got it was because the X-T4's IBIS isn't perfect. It's not amazing. There's a lot of flaws with it, but I've noticed using the OIS in the 18-55 actually makes a pretty big difference. So especially for shooting video, if you want a slightly better video lens in terms of stability, then the 18-55 is better in that. Not to say the 16-55 is bad, but the X-T4 is kind of rough with its image stabilization. Another thing OIS could be useful for would be to get like low light shots if you want to shoot at like a different shutter speed and you need to be like stable, but you want to get kind of those fast moving shots or whatnot, then the OIS in the 18-55 is actually really, really good at that. So that's just another thing that differentiates these two lenses that I think will make a pretty solid difference depending on your needs, whether you need that image stabilization or not. I'll kind of conclude it up. I want to give some final thoughts about these two and some final recommendations if you are still unsure about which lens to get, and that is in regards to purpose, as to what purpose I think each lens has been built for and provided for. The 18-55 is kind of a cheaper, more budget-friendly, portable zoom lens for Fujifilm's systems, while the 16-55 is of superb optical image quality. It's going to be bigger, but it's overall the better lens out of both lenses. So what I find the situations that I use the 16-55 lens in is for all my at-home work. So for this video, for example, I record with the 16-55, and pretty much anything that is inside of a room that I don't have to go outside and bring the lens outside with me, I'll use the 16-55 because it's just amazing. So I'll use it for all studio and home work and things like that. And I think it's also really good for professional work or photo shoots. So if you have dedicated photo shoots where you're going out and you don't mind bringing extra gear or things like that because you're trying to get the best image quality, then the 16-55 is really, really good. And then you're not concerned about size. You just want to get the best image quality. What I find myself using the 18-55 is more for personal work or casual work. So whenever I'm going traveling, like when I was in Europe, I used the 18-55 completely on the X-T4 the whole trip. And I also had the X100V, but you get my point. It's the more compact, more travel-friendly lens. And I think it beats the 16-55 in those aspects because I don't want to be lugging out the 16-55 when I'm walking around a country, going on trains, metros, and all that stuff. It's just annoying to have around, and it's not worth the image quality in my opinion for those cases. But for like 1 hour or 2 hour photo shoots, the 16-55 is the lens of choice. So that is just kind of my thoughts on it. And surprisingly, I use both lenses. I wasn't sure if I would continue to use both lenses after all of this, but I think they both found their way into kind of my kit, and they both do a great job at what they do. So anyways, those are just my thoughts on both lenses. Hopefully I made kind of a cohesive review of them. If you have any questions, please leave them down below. And if you also have any other experiences with how you've been using either lens or which one kind of works for you, please leave them down in the comments below as well. I think a lot of people will benefit from other kind of stories as well. So if you like this video, please like the video down below. Subscribe to this channel for more photography stuff. And yeah, I'll see you guys in another video. Thanks for watching. As always, peace.